Although Christians tend to villainize the Roman Empire in terms and think of them in terms of their violence against Christianity, Rome's origin myths show us Rome's belief that they were a unique and special people in history, and thus their morality was based on furthering the Roman Empire. First, we see this in their belief that selfless duty to Rome was the biggest virtue. Next, we see this in their belief that they were destined for greatness by the gods. Finally, we can understand this because they saw ruthless pragmatism as necessary for their existence and part of their morality. Point 1. Their belief that selfless duty was their greatest virtue. So, Rome's main origin story is the Aeneid, and this was written by a man named Virgil. And he wrote it to attempt to show Rome's divine destiny. According to Dr. Gerald Lucas, quote, the Aeneid, quote, presents the Roman ideals of their mission to conquer the known world by a sense of duty to family, state, and the gods, unquote. So the Aeneid focuses on duty. It starts out with a man named Aeneas, and he is among the Trojans. After the Trojan War, the city was being destroyed, and he actually saves his father and brings him out. So this is kind of part of tradition. There were laws in that time, so if a son killed his father, he would be punished, but if a father killed his son, it was perfectly fine. In fact, the punishment for killing your father was what I like to call a body bag rodeo. So essentially what they do is they sacrifice a bull and kind of wrap you up in the skin, and then they throw like a snake and a rooster and a dog or some animals in there, and then they sew it up and they ride around Rome, and these animals are very angry, so they beat you up, essentially scratch you and bite you while you're sealed inside this bag, and at the end you're tossed into the river for the river god. So this kind of tradition of respecting fathers and things like this was kind of part of his duty. He saw to uphold this tradition, so he saved his father from the destruction of Troy and actually carried him out on his shoulder. After they left Troy, they headed for Italy, and on their way, they ran into, because of a storm, they ran into northern Africa, where they met Dido, who was the queen of the Carthaginians. Soon, Dido and Aeneas fell in love, but Jupiter, the god, king of the gods, sent Mercury, the messenger, to remind Aeneas that he was headed for Italy. So he essentially just kind of ups and leaves in the middle of the night and doesn't tell her about any of this. And she feels very betrayed, and she actually ends up committing suicide. So when he gets to Italy, he marries the daughter of a king named Latinus. He meets them pretty quickly upon arrival, and they become allies. Another prince named Turnus was very angry because he had wanted to marry the daughter of Latinus. And later on, he meets a king named Evander. So during this time, they're getting attacked by Turnus and his people. He meets the king Evander, and they ally with each other. They ally with each other. And the king Evander gives him his son Pallas to help fight with them. Now, his son Pallas is young and brave, and they kind of become good friends. So they're fighting with this angry prince, essentially, who wanted to marry the guy that Aeneas married, and this prince kills Pallas. So after this, Aeneas is very angry, and he tries to get the prince to duel with him, and eventually they do, and he wounds him, and Pallas is just begging him for mercy. Turnus is begging him for mercy when he realizes, when he's about to save him, but he realizes he's wearing the belt of his friend Pallas, who he had killed, and so he kills him. So what these stories go to show is that Aeneas, along the way, even though it would have been easier not to, stayed true to kind of his sense of duty to well, the Roman Empire, even though it didn't exist yet. And we see this in how he, saved his father and went along with that tradition of valuing fathers. He left the Dido woman he was in love with, even though he didn't have to technically, and he killed Pallas, all for the good of the Roman Empire. I'm sorry, he killed Turnus, all for the good of the Roman Empire. Point 2. The Romans thought that they were predestined for greatness by the gods. According to Livy, quote, "The fates had already decreed the origin of this great city and the foundation of the mightiest empire under heaven," unquote. So we see that this was kind of the Roman idea that this was destined to be, and that they were supported by the gods. So there were two descendants of Aeneas named Numitor and Amulius. And Numitor was the older, but Amulius wanted the throne anyway, so he kind of attacked him and chased him out, overthrew him. And to avoid having any descendants of Numitor who could potentially take the throne of him, he made his only daughter a Vestal Virgin, who was a priestess, and they remained virgins their whole lives, so he would never have any descendants. But one day, Mars came down and impregnated her, and she was pregnant with twins. This was a very big deal because this could cause her to be killed, really. So what they would do if a Vestal Virgin broke her kind of oath, is they would put her in an underground chamber with a few days' food, and they would seal her inside. So it was eventually she was just like buried alive, is what would happen, with a little bit of food and water. And the reason for this is technically you weren't allowed to bury people within the bounds of the city, and so they had to give her. They had to give them some food and water, so it was like technically legal because they were technically burying them, because they could still have a little bit of food. So this is kind of the kind of thing that she would face if she did this. So this was a very big deal to them in this time. And she gave birth, eventually, to Romulus and Remus. So Amulius found out, and he threw them in a basket and tossed them in a river to essentially try to kill them of exposure. But they were found by a she-wolf who fed them until the shepherd Faustulus stumbled upon them and eventually raised them. So, as they got older, they wanted to found a city, and they kind of got into an argument over who would own it once they created it. So they decided to fix it by auguries, which is kind of like omens, using birds. So they would look up in the sky and kind of like divide the sky, and wait for birds. So Romulus first saw 6 birds, and then Remus Remus saw 6 birds, and then Romulus saw 12 birds afterwards. So Remus thought he had won because he saw the birds first, and Romulus thought he won because he saw more birds. So this was kind of their argument. And eventually Romulus would kill Remus and become the ruler of Rome because of this. So we could see that they thought their empire was predestined by the gods because of the fact that Romulus and Remus were supposedly descended from Mars, the god, and also Vestal Virgin, which just makes it all the more extraordinary. And also the fact that the gods sent the omens to kind of help determine who would own the city of Rome. On to point 3. Ruthless pragmatism was part of their morality. So, after their argument and stuff like that, as I said, they just kind of were fighting more and more, and Romulus had made kind of a wall around his stuff, and Rem came and he hopped over it, and he was stabbed. Remulus came and he was stabbed by Romulus, who said, after he killed him, allegedly said, quote, "So it shall be henceforth with everyone who leaps over my walls." So this is kind of an iconic moment where he kills his own brother, and then essentially pronounces that, this will be the strong city of Rome. So murdering your brother in that time was very bad, especially he built it on, or murdered him on the sacred ground of Rome. But he also did something else that was pretty bad. So essentially the city was founded by mostly men, because really all they had to work with was essentially the loyal band of like troops that kind of followed them around. And so this is kind of what they started the city with. And as a result, they didn't really have any women. And so the population wasn't stable and they needed more women. So what they tried to do was kind of go to surrounding nations and areas and, try and pick up some ladies to bring home. But no one would really let this happen because they were afraid of the power of Rome. And so they had to resort to, well, he didn't have to, but trickery. For the Festival of Neptune, they had like a big event where they invited people and they're going to have games and things. And essentially, a lot of the Sabinians came, like almost all of them did. And they had a lot of young unmarried women with them. And so they kind of all just jumped out and took all the women for Rome. And this actually caused a lot of conflict with the parents. But in the end, they thought it was a good move because they needed to do this to populate their city. So we see he kind of did two pretty bad things, which was he kidnapped all these women without their father's consent and things like this. And he killed his brother Romulus on Roman grounds. So, although these were very bad, it was kind of moral in the way they saw it. So their morality system was based more on the end results of things, on the consequences of things, unlike today where it's based more on kind of like doing what's right no matter what and doing your duty. And specifically the end results they were looking for was the furthering of Rome. So this would explain why, although he did this terrible thing of killing his brother, in the end the city of Rome was kind of built on this, and that's why it wasn't so bad. And that's why people liked him. And he did this terrible thing. He kidnapped all these women. But in the end, again, the city of Rome was kind of built on this. And this also goes back to the sense of duty, where it's like he always had his eyes kind of set on the goal of, or Aeneas did, back to Aeneas, set on the goal of furthering the Roman Empire. And that was what's most important to them in their morality. So, although as Christians, we tend to villainize the Romans and think of the Roman Empire in terms of the violence they perpetrated against Christians, they actually did have kind of their own moral code. It was just based on furthering the Roman Empire. And Rome's origins myths actually show this, and that therefore demonstrates their belief that they were a unique and special people in history because they thought they were... because they thought that it was moral to further their empire. And we see this in their belief that selfless duty was kind of their most important virtue, their belief that they were destined for greatness by the gods, and their ruthless pragmatism that they saw as necessary for their existence and part of their morality. Thank you.